Hey there, it's Tom Jordan. We talk a lot about illegal immigration, about all the threats from the millions of people who've come across the southern border, and some of them are on the terror watch list. And we know they're very dangerous. They're coming in from, about 140, 150 countries around the world. We don't know who many of them are. There's a lot of attention down south, but not as much attention, not nearly enough attention up north. The U.S. Canadian border. We rarely discuss what's happening there. And yet, over the past 2 years, there have been roughly 1,000 encounters with individuals on the U.S. terror watch list attempting to cross the northern border from Canada. That's double the encounters from down south. Did you know that? Did you understand that? That there are more than double the amount of people on the terror watch list coming in from Canada to the United States or attempting to than there are we're catching down south. That's an amazing statistic. And we're not discussing the ones that have gotten away. These are just the ones that we caught and we know about. Charlie LeDuff knows about this, and he's going to join me in a few seconds to talk about that and why it is happening from his perspective. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. Of course, he's an author, New York Times best-selling author. He used to work for the New York Times many years ago when it was a bit of a different publication. In fact, we're going to talk about this morning with Charlie LeDuff an article that came out today in the New York Times regarding illegal immigration and what they're finally admitting, something that we people in my audience here have known about for 3.5 years. They're finally like scratching their head. Hey, we just saw some data here that, yeah, this is bad. So we'll get into that in just a few moments. Also, just a reminder to chime in, comment. You can ask me some questions in the comment section on YouTube, on X, on Facebook, wherever you're watching right now in the live stream. And of course, remember the podcast is available as well on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. And you can see it on LinkedIn as well. So I'm going to get to your comments and your questions in just a moment. So please chime in. I thank you for your patience while you do that, and we'll get to them after the interview with Charlie LeDuff. Also, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe and click on that notification bell. And if you could, please share our podcasts. That helps us out tremendously as well as we're growing our audience here at Tom Jordan Live. All right, Justin Trudeau, you know him. He's from Canada. He's the guy up north. He's got some pretty lax immigration policies. The Prime Minister of Canada, his immigration system has proven dangerously lenient with the government audit that they put out, revealing that nearly half of flagged security risks are still allowed entry into Canada. You're a red flag person. You're a hugely big risk to our country. That's all right. You can still come in. More than half are still being allowed into Canada. And then they come down south to the United States. Except in that geographic anomaly right by Detroit where they actually have to go north to get into the United States across the Detroit River. So there's a pretty chilling example that I think Charlie's going to talk about. But in 2023, Canada issued a student visa to a 20-year-old Pakistani. He was later arrested in the United States for plotting a smuggler-assisted attack targeting Jews in New York City. Just one of many, a glaring failure of Canada's vetting system. They don't seem to really care if they're dangerous or not. They just come right in. There was that failed visa experiment when Trudeau scrapped visa requirements for Mexican nationals in 2016. No requirement needed if you're from Mexico to come into our country. But he had to reinstate them later because this year, in fact, because he was being overwhelmed with asylum claims there. You do know that the vast majority of asylum seekers do not qualify for asylum. They're coming over for a better life, and that's great, but that's not asylum status. So the vast majority of them are rejected, but still the vast majority of them never leave, at least this country. I'm not sure how it works necessarily in Canada, but maybe they just come down south to the United States. But the damage was already done there because of this. Cartels have established this fentanyl pipeline from Toronto, Canada, to Detroit, Michigan, here in the United States. A huge fentanyl pipeline killing so many people every single year. Huge loophole in Canada as well. The weak border enforcement and the flawed policies have made Canada really an easy access point for terrorists and criminals to target the United States. They're threatening the security of both of these nations, Canada and the United States. And it seems like over the past 3.5 years, both countries have seemingly wanted this to occur. And there's all the economic fallout. There's a social fallout as a result of all this, beyond the security risks. Trudeau's immigration approach has exacerbated cross-border drug trafficking, fueling the opioid crisis in American cities like Detroit, like Chicago, like New York, like Los Angeles, like San Diego, like, St. Louis, Missouri, every city in this country. And it's straining the U.S. healthcare system and the law enforcement resources as well, because the cops have to go out and deal with this kind of stuff. So Donald Trump he's fired a warning shot. Former President Donald Trump and the president-elect, he's proposing a 25% tariff on Canadian goods to pressure Trudeau into addressing these security concerns. It's an aggressive, but I think it's a necessary step to protect American interests. People are saying, no, we can't do tariffs. Why not? If all they're going to respond to is some type of economic hardship, then give them economic hardship, because they're not responding to any other thing, even security threats, even terrorist threats. So maybe they'll respond to an economic threat. There's a lot of soft leadership going on. We're afraid to upset the apple cart in a sense, but you got to have some pretty hard consequences against that soft leadership. And Justin Trudeau is kind of a soft individual. He's a soft leader. And his focus on these symbolic gestures and open door policies ignores the real world consequences of bad actors exploiting Canada's goodwill. Same thing with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and these Democratic presidents and members of Congress and members of the U.S. Senate who are Democrats who seem suddenly to love illegal immigration. Like that's the right thing to do. It's not leadership. It is progressive leadership, but it's not real leadership. It's negligence. And it's a continental problem now. Think about it. Mexico, United States, and Canada. And the fallout from Canada's immigration failures doesn't stop at the border. U.S. citizens are now paying the price in terms of crime, drugs, security threats, stemming from Ottawa's, if you don't know, Ottawa's the capital of Canada, in Ontario, a total lack of foresight about what these things are going to do. I mean, what was the point of border security in the first place? To prevent the consequences that hurt people. Do you not have the foresight to see that? So there is a call from people for reform. Serious people calling for serious reform. Canada must overhaul its immigration and border security systems to prevent further exploitation. The United States cannot afford to sit back and hope that Justin Trudeau corrects course. We got to take control. We have to have real leadership, and I think real leadership is coming in. Tom Homan and Donald Trump together, decisive action, accountability are overdue. So I'm going to bring in now Charlie LeDuff. Had a conversation just a few minutes ago with him. He's a busy guy, so we pre-recorded this just a few minutes ago, and that's why we had a bit of a late start here, because we were talking with Charlie LeDuff in downtown Detroit, Michigan, which is now the hotbed of drug cartels streaming in fentanyl from Toronto into Detroit. Charlie LeDuff, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. We'll talk about the word journalist in a moment. He's a reporter, and he's on the streets fighting. Let's watch that interview now with me and Charlie LeDuff. All right, Charlie LeDuff, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, former correspondent for the New York Times, which we're going to talk about today, that publication. Also with Fox. Of course, he was a New York Times best-selling author and is the host of the No BS News Hour. Charlie, it's good to see you. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Morning, Tom. Man, you're welcome, brother. Good to see you.
Thank you. So I want to, we're talking about this whole issue of illegal immigration. We've talked a lot about the southern border, not a whole lot about the northern border. We're going to get into that in just a moment, because the danger and the threat from Canada, based on their policies up there and mixed with the United States policy, it's not a good mix, because it's putting our citizens in a lot of danger here. But I want to pull up you brought this to my attention this morning. The New York Times, after years of ignoring the crisis at the southern border, they come out, and thankfully you pointed this out this morning, and here's the headline: recent immigration surge has been largest in U.S. history. Under President Biden, more than 2 million immigrants per year have entered. Government data shows. And I'm thinking, I'm scratching my head. I'm like, well, yeah, we were talking about this 3 years ago when they hit 2 million in that year. What do you make of this? That the New York Times is finally admitting after an election that this has been going on.
What this tells me is the newspaper sucks. It's fallen a long way from when I worked there, because in the last huge wave of immigration in this country was around the year 2000 when NAFTA went into effect. Then I crossed with the Sinaloa cartel, and that thing went on the front page, and we were trying to really lock in history, like for our grandkids, how did we get here, etc. Now what you saw was subterfuge, going along with the administration, pretending this wasn't an issue. And it's like everything else that you're seeing roll across your screen in your tablets now, which is, we were wrong, we're in a bubble, the people have ignored us and made up their own minds. This thing that the New York Times puts out way too late is an acknowledgement of what we all have known, and it's should actually make you happy, America, that you're not stupid. Also, when they say 2 million illegals a year, that data did not take into account the 2 million gotaways. Those are probably the terrorists and the criminals and the cartel members. And here's the big one. Over 1 million people a year jump their visas. You come in on a tourist visa, a student visa, and you're supposed to go home. You don't. It's another 1 million a year. Under the Biden administration, we've issued a record number of student and tourist visas from places like Tajikistan. Where are you getting the money to get a Manhattan hotel room and go see a Broadway show? So it's been an abject failure. The New York Times now admits it, and it's a little bit too late, Tom.
Yeah, it's very sad what has happened to the state of journalism. And I remember like when CNN was trying to cover the border, when even at the latter portion of Donald Trump's years, and Jim Acosta goes down to the border, standing next to the wall, and he says, there's no need for this wall because clearly you can see there are no illegal immigrants around us, defending, the whole thing that this was just a made-up crisis. But I'm thinking, okay, there's a wall there. That's why there's no illegal immigrants coming across in that location, Jim Acosta. Go over to Eagle Pass, or go over to, the Otay Mesa border of San Diego, or Hamul, and all these places we know they're coming across. You won't go there because you're in denial about it and trying to pull this ruse over the American people that all of this is just a made-up crisis by these hateful conservatives that are out there. And I've covered the border since I grew up in a border town. Fully everyone acknowledged, Democrats and Republicans, this was an issue. We have to keep fighting illegal immigration. But it seems that this iteration of the Democratic Party has not only been hiding this, but they've been wanting illegal immigration to proliferate throughout this country. And I don't know why that is. Maybe you have a thought as to why that might be the case.
Well, and I just let that one move on. I mean, everybody's got their thoughts on it, But the wall works in urban centers, like, a gym with your purple shirt out there with the sleeves rolled up that you just got back from the dry cleaner. You're standing in the middle of a park in the middle of a city. That wall was put up there so when people come over the border, they don't immediately mix in with the general public. But maybe a month earlier, I'd gone out maybe a mile from where he was, and I climbed the wall and I jumped it. And I was trying to make the point, hey, guess what? Even if you jump the wall on both sides of the wall, that's American territory, because the wall is not on the river. The wall basically walls off a piece of the United States. You know what I mean? So yes. I think we've all learned with the immigration policies and the lies about I'm an asylum seeker. You're not an asylum seeker. You're looking to make some bread. I would do the same. But once you touch American soil, asylum, and that's it. That's the deal there, Jim. But Jim's the kind of guy who's, finally he's getting his comeuppance because he's got no ratings. Nobody's listening. We want some truth. The American people are not hateful. And here it is. It's just a snowball effect now. We were lying. And what Tom Jordan tells you is the truth.
We just what we try to do, and people somehow think it's hateful for what we're talking about. But I mean, you go on there, you get a lot of
Nobody thinks that. No, nobody
they
thinks.
don't really mean it. Yeah, you're
Do
right.
you
They
do
don't
you
think it.
notice now the
Yeah.
sensible people have come out?
Yes.
No, 10% think that.
Yeah.
So forget them.
And those are the loudest, the 10%, or maybe it's 3%, but they're the loudest out there making a bunch of noise. And I like to call ourselves just common sense individuals. We can see what's in front of our eyes. One of the things that is incredibly concerning to me, and it has been for quite some time, are the number of terrorists. You mentioned, I think it was Tajikistan that people are coming in from, but they're coming from all over the world. I think it's about 140 countries. And a lot of them are not very friendly to the United States. And we've talked a lot about that perspective of the terrorist watch list from the southern border perspective. But what you have written about now very recently on the NoBSNewsHour.com is this, and on X, you're very prolific, you're on X a lot and writing about these things, thankfully, is the fact that the northern border now is a huge avenue, boulevard of people on the terrorist watch list coming in from Canada into the United States. In fact, it's even more people on the terrorist watch list coming from Canada than they are coming in from Mexico. Tell us about that. What's happening and why is that being allowed to occur from Canada into the United States?
So we'll back up and go, okay, Trump's going to stick a 25% tariff on you because of drugs and immigration. And everybody goes, what? Right? Mm-hmm. Let's go back to Jim Acosta back in the primary season, right? And Trump wins New Hampshire. And the number one issue up here on the northern border is immigration. And these pinheads from Manhattan can't understand why New Hampshire would worry about what's going on in Mexico. Because it's going on in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, and Michigan. 10 times as many illegals come over the southern border than come through the northern border. But that's still 200,000 people from Canada. But what's interesting is 2 times as many people on the terror watch list are coming in from Canada to the United States. In the last 2 years, 1,000 encounters with people on the terror watch list. From Mexico, 500 people. Now, it only took 10 terrorists to take down the Twin Towers, okay? So Trudeau's woke and ridiculous and gullible immigration policies, ask any Canadian, they've had a record number of immigrants come in, student visas, work holidays, etc., and they don't vet them. Canada's own government audited itself. And 50% of people that applying for a visa to come into Canada that were red flagged by the security services were allowed in anyway. Mm-hmm. For instance, in September, a Pakistani national on a student visa, 20 years old, was apprehended, tipped by the FBI. He was planning to come over from Canada into New York and slaughter Jews. That's what he's given us. That's what needs to stop. Point number 2. In 2016, old pretty boy Trudeau, old Poutine Pinko up there, he decided that the Mexicans, because of the trade bloc, the Mexicans would no longer need visas. That was 2016. In February of this year, he reversed himself. Why did he reverse visas for Mexicans? Because they had a record number of asylum seekers. Mexico is not considered a place where you would be granted asylum. Right? They don't torture in Mexico, etc. But that's what Justin gave you. Now he's fully reversed it, but it's too late. So this is what we get in Detroit because of Justin. The cartels got onto this one, and they flew into Canada, and now we got a fentanyl pipeline from Toronto to Detroit. That's what he did. That's what he's given us, and that's why Trump wants it stopped.
So you wrote about something, I think it was a couple years ago, you were writing about, and I think that time you were writing a column in one of the local newspapers in the city of Detroit. And you were talking about you tracked a terrorist, a guy on the terrorist watch list who was in Detroit. He had a place there. You also discussed the issue of the fentanyl pipeline coming in from, that Detroit itself was one of the major hubs in the United States where drugs are coming in, whether it's from Mexico or whether now it's from, like you say, Toronto, into the state of Michigan. How prevalent is the drug trade happening now in what we would consider, a lot of people flyover country, a Midwestern state, supposed to be a nice, safe area from border issues. But you're writing about the fact that no, actually, Michigan and Detroit specifically is a major hub for drug cartel trafficking from Mexico and now from Canada, right here in the Midwest.
Yes, well, that's the history of Detroit. We're the Midwest. It's a good spoke. If you look at NAFTA, we're a big NAFTA city. We got the NAFTA highway. If you go back to the '80s and you look at the cocaine trade, Detroit was an epicenter. The Young Boys Incorporated, et cetera. So you have Chicago. Basically, the cartels everywhere now, everywhere. Thank you, Mr. Biden. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. How do we bust it up? Well, I guess only the futures can reveal it. But you can see the border czar, Tom Homan. He's sort of signaling. He's out there doing the PR deal. We're going to lock you up. Anybody gets in our way, we're going to lock you up. I like the Dirty Harry methodology because from my people, reporters I know, etc. The tide of humanity coming in from the South has been cut in half. And they're in Mexico City now, all the migrants, right? I got a very good friend and just filed a bunch of reports down there. Todd Bensman, look him up. All the migrants are turning around. They're going home. It's
right
over.
now,
Like
based on the election. Is that what you're saying?
based on the election and what Tom Homan's saying, what Trump's saying. And so, maybe we get control of this. And let's face it, what's done is done. We're not rounding up babushka or abuela. We're not doing that. We're gonna focus on the criminals.
Yeah.
And the fabric of the United States has changed, hopefully for the best. We've been through it before, but 100% absolutely, we're not paying for your housing, we're not paying for your medical, and we're not paying for your prison. You're going home.
Well, what do you think? You look at what Justin Trudeau has now done by, these lax visa requirements in his country and the leniency that he has shown in these immigration laws, and how it's endangered, Canadian citizens and now, by extension, United States citizens. And it's also put us, at a huge risk based on who's coming now into our country. Should the United States, I know that Donald Trump's talked about these 25% tariffs, both on Mexico, Mexico and on Canada, but should more be done? What do you think would be a real effective way of turning the tide? I know it's starting to be stemmed down in Mexico, but because of Trump and Tom Homan, but what's going to happen, do you think, with Canada? Does Trump need to be more aggressive towards, Justin Trudeau specifically?
Well, it looks like he is, right? I mean, he's calling him governor, and Trudeau is down there, like kneeling, kissing the ring. But Trudeau, sort of hyphenated. The word translates loosely into water hole. So Trudeau is definitely a woke swamp creature. That's
Yes.
what we're gonna call. We're gonna call him Water Boy. All right, we need a nickname for him. So Trudeau is threatening to reciprocate with these tariffs. So remember something: basic economics here. When you have the world's reserve currency, the United States dollar, it makes your goods very expensive because it's strong. Canada's dollar is trading at what, 70, 75 cents to the dollar. So you produce in Canadian dollars, and then when you export it into the United States, the price of your goods are cheaper. So we also have a $100 billion trade imbalance. What Canada's doing is, because we're in a trade block, they can do it. They're flooding us with cheaper goods. They're just flooding us. So he's threatening to withhold what? Car parts, maple syrup. He won't take our cherries. Well, to quote Monica Conyers, the clownish convict of the Detroit
Yes.
City Council, I say, do it, baby. Do it. Do it, baby.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because all
Yeah.
of this, the world was ridiculous. We got to rebuild. We got to appreciate. Again, people call me liberal, which is weird. and then people call me conservative, which is
Yeah.
weird. So
Yeah.
I think I'm just somewhere trying to make sense. And it's a good time in America right now. I think,
It is. I think it is
we're
too.
coming together a little bit. We're getting ourselves,
We are.
we're getting a hold of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. When Morning Joe and Mika Brzezinski reach out to Donald Trump to have a confab down at Mar-a-Lago, something's afoot. Something's changing here. And I think that's a good thing. Hopefully that pendulum is swinging. But I still have a great distrust for the general abilities or the willingness of American journalists to go out and do some of the things that you're doing right now. So you mentioned off the air
Let me
where we were
throw this
talking.
in. We
Yeah,
need
go
we
ahead.
need less journalists and more reporters. You know what I mean? A
Yes.
reporter, a reporter drinks in public with the public. A
Yep.
journalist drinks in private with
Hmm.
the public official. And
Yeah.
that's what we've been handed for decades now. And it's time for that to blow up. And you notice though, reporters aren't getting phone calls. We were talking beforehand, like you can't challenge your guest.
Yeah.
You can't speak truth to power. Like
Hmm.
if the bosses of these media concerns don't get their shit together, they're going down. They're like the drunk at the blackjack table in Vegas. It's like 3 in the morning. You got a 6 a.m. flight. You've got three chips, two aces. Instead of splitting them, you're like, hit, hold. You're trying to drag it out until your flight, your retirement. You know what I mean? Dude, go all in with this thing. It's a sure bet. Let's go.
Yeah, yeah, the
Serve the
public will be
people.
grateful. Listen, if you go all in and you start acting as a reporter, I like that this distinction between a journalist and reporter. It's kind of like, a cop versus an agent. The cop is on the street battling crime. An agent is sitting up there on the 11th floor of the whatever building they're in, trying to figure out, how they can appease whoever appointed them to that position. Cops, reporters, that's what we need. It's a great analogy. But I want you to talk about a little bit of what's happening in Lansing. I know you're working on a bunch of stuff, and then we got to let you go because I know you got to prepare for your own show, which is
Yeah,
happening today
the
on the BS NewsHour.
NoBSNewsHour.com. You know what I mean?
Right?
Top 200 in America, by the way. Um,
Yeah, great.
we got we,
Congrats.
we got the lame duck legislature, which is basically a sneaky, secretive, run a bunch of legislation through before the Christmas holiday, but after the election, um,
Mm-hmm.
to
Right.
waste your money because nobody's
Mm-hmm.
got the guts to do it before the election. Stuff like giving billionaire Dan Gilbert $1 billion to buy the empty Renaissance Center, while at the same time they're still working under the COVID rules, and 85% of the bureaucrats are at least working in part at home. So we're spending $1 billion for buildings for public officials who aren't showing up to work.
Right.
We've got, transgender sex education, driver's licenses for illegals, free water and subsidized housing for middle class people, all kinds of whacked out shit that we're not getting a look at. When you talk to decent representatives, they'll call us in at midnight. Here's the legislation. You got 15 minutes, go. So
Mm-hmm.
it's all special interest garbage. We went up there. Made a pretty good video. Nobody's there. And you can find that at theenjoyer.com or
Hmm.
Charlie LeDuff on X or nobsnewshour.com. But, we're really trying to hit it. And it's going to be great because, like Duggan, the mayor of Detroit,
Yeah.
right? The kingmaker's not a Democrat anymore because he doesn't believe in it. But actually, the reason is, dude, he polls at 3% statewide, 12% in Detroit, tied with Jocelyn Benson, and 0% on the west side. He knows.
Yeah.
And Mike, I'm going to be there because no journalist ever wanted to keep track of you. Well, I'm keeping track of you and you, Madam Benson, and whoever comes out as the Republican, because that's what the people want and that's what they deserve.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're a reporter, and proudly so. I'm going to start using that term now for the good journalists. We'll call them reporters now. We'll call the
Wait, let
elite
me
the
pause.
journalists. Go
Let
ahead.
me pause.
Yes,
Can you
pause.
type? Can you type without looking?
I can.
Then you're a journalist.
Oh no.
Reporters.
Oh, I
Reporters.
know. Yeah, I can. But you know why? One of my best classes, one of the things I learned in high school, ninth grade, one of the very few things until I got serious about education in college, was learning how to type. Mr.
I did
forget
it
his name.
too.
Harry taught me how to type. That was my teacher's name, the best teacher I ever had because it helped me out in my career. But what I cannot do is use my thumbs. So when I text you, it's most likely voice to text. So I apologize for those errors as well on that. Listen, people should go to the No BS News Hour, nobsnewshour.com. BS stands for bad stuff, I think is what it is. And also, I didn't know you were part of Enjoyer. Fantastic. I love that website as well. Charlie LeDuff, as always, a privilege, a pleasure, and keep up the good work. Yeah, thanks to Charlie LeDuff for pointing out these things that most people don't are just not aware of. Yeah, and that's what he's an independent reporter. I almost said journalist again. I got to watch myself on that. So, Charlie LeDuff, thanks so much. Appreciate it. We have some comments here. Let's bring them up one by one, discussing this whole issue. Let's start with. We begin with Jeannie Euler. Holy cow, I had no idea. Thanks for that information. Thank you, Jeannie. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Jeannie and I go way back, like in the early 90s time frame. Yeah, I had no idea either. And it's important that these reporters go out there and cover this stuff. And who knows, maybe this will be like, I don't know, 10 years ago, 7 years ago, a lot of, the journalists were out there saying that this is all a manufactured crisis at the border. It's not really happening. And I would talk with these journalists who would tell me that I'm making all of this stuff up. I'm like, no, it's actually been going on for many, many years, and it's only getting worse, and you're just ignoring it. No, I watched Jim Acosta on CNN, and he told me it's not happening. And that's the digging that these journalists would do, watch CNN or MSNBC. So, yeah, Jeannie, you're correct. Most people are not aware this is happening, and it's a huge issue at the northern border coming down from Canada. And I can remember back just after 9/11, there were a number of terrorists who were caught coming across, I think from Toronto, maybe it was Victoria as well, who had plans to commit terrorist attacks and activity here in the United States, and they were caught coming across the northern border. So that is a concern up there. I guess it always has been, but now they're streaming, and some of them are being caught, but that's 1,000 that have been caught. Who wasn't caught, and who's here in this country? Jeannie, thanks so much. Let's bring up another one here. It is Harry Sakalian is back. Hello, Harry. Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Harry. Great interview with Mr. LeDuff. The New York Times' recent realization of the magnitude of illegal immigration is a perfect example of willful ignorance. Give me a break. Thanks, Harry Sakalian. It is willful ignorance. They know this is happening. I was speaking with Charlie prior to the interview. It's like he alerted me this morning that this just dropped on the New York Times website. And I know it's a little bit down on the page, on the front page, but they knew 3.5 years ago. I knew it, and I'm just one guy, and I happened to work and lead a newsroom at that time in Denver, Colorado, for a couple months. And I would send reporters down to Tapachula, Mexico, right across the border of Guatemala, and there were huge caravans of people boldly stating that they're coming to cross the border illegally. In places like Texas and Arizona and in California. And they were wearing Biden T-shirts and thanking Joe Biden for inviting them to come and across illegally. And it was happening 3.5 years ago. They knew it. They just didn't want to cover it because they were still in the Biden camp, and they wanted to prop him up as this great unifier and somebody who cares deeply about what ails us in this country. Not willing to recognize and admit that they were facilitating something that was slowly and more increasingly deteriorating our country, not because of those people based on their race or ethnicity, because we didn't have the resources to take care of them, and they weren't going through the proper channels. And instead, we were increasing huge tax, and we're giving out free subsidies and services that we don't provide our own citizens. And Charlie mentioned it. We'll give hotel rooms in Manhattan, nice meals at fine dining restaurants, and those types of things. I mean, that's kind of an exaggeration on the fine dining, but they were providing the meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it's like, okay, and now Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, is finally saying, yeah, we can't do this. He was one of those guys. Remember, he flew down to talk to Greg Abbott in Texas. Eric Adams went down to Texas to say, you're the problem with illegal immigration. You need to stem the flow. You're not handling it correctly. When it was Joe Biden, and finally Eric Adams Adams comes out and says Joe Biden is ruining our country, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, by allowing illegal immigration to flood his city, is what he was concerned about. And that issue, it is a crisis, is ruining the city of New York. And Eric Adams is finally admitting it, just like the New York Times has no option now but to acknowledge what everybody else objectively recognizes and sees is happening. It is a terrorist threat. It is a national security threat. And I'm telling you, if there are some terrorist plots that are uncovered or that succeed in this country, boy, we allowed that to happen. Anyway, thanks so much for that, Harry. Let's bring up another comment here, and then I'll get to some headlines. We bring up Vaughn Westerby. Hey, Vaughn, welcome back. Trudeau is a soft leader, depending on who he is dealing with. Yeah, isn't that a good point? Remember, I think you do, Vaughn, the trucking crisis, if you will, that was happening back, I don't know, what was that, 2.5 years ago now, where he decided to, because the truckers were going on strike and they were in Ottawa and they were, jamming the streets because it was unfair the vaccine mandates that he was, oppressing his people with. And the truckers said, no, we're not going to do it. We can't do it. And here's a variety of reasons for it. What did he do? He seized their assets. He became a strong leader when it came to that COVID vaccine and shutting down the truckers' abilities to work by threat of throwing them in prison and seizing their own personal assets from the banks. And there was the Ambassador Bridge from Canada into Detroit. And boy, they certainly cracked down on them with strong leadership. So yeah, it just depends who he's dealing with, right? Mostly soft, though. I like the way that Charlie LeDuff said, I didn't know his last name, Trudeau, actually is loosely translated water hole. So then by extension and by definition, he said he's part of the swamp. Let's call him Water Boy after that. Charlie LeDuff, always great. Thanks for your comments as well. It's always a privilege to interact with the audience here. Well, listen, the United States, there's got to be some type of pressure on Canada now. Diplomatic pressure, sure. Economic sanctions, maybe. Joint security initiatives, that would be good. The United States, you got to demand that Canada takes responsibility for its role in the growing threats at the northern border, because, boy, the terrorist activity that might happen in the United States, part of it, the blame has to go to Justin Trudeau on that. All right, I don't know if you saw this. Let's get to some headlines here. Jamal Bowman, boy, some rhetoric he put out there yesterday based on the not guilty verdict for Daniel Penny. He lashes out at white people in this very fiery post-election thread that he posted on X, a blistering series of posts. Congressman Jamal Bowman, a Democrat out of New York, he's on his way out because he lost, defeated convincingly. He took aim at police violence and what he called the evil of white supremacy. Yeah, I think white supremacy is evil. Just like I think any other ethnic group that thinks they're superior over any other group of people is evil as well. It's wrong. And it does need to be dealt with, but that's not what's happening here. And he's wrongly accusing white people of supporting white supremacy. So he expressed his frustration with white people specifically, and saying that, some are just too far gone, white people are. This firebrand, he's a far left progressive. He's a member of the controversial squad, unleashed his tirade, not long after his primary loss to George Latimer, if you know about that. More moderate Democrat, George Latimer is, but he beat Bowman in the primary by 58.6% to 41.4%. So he's gone, Jamal Bowman is. But here's what he wrote. Angered by the not guilty verdict of Daniel Penny, a man who happens to be white, but he was protecting people on the subway from a very violent man who was threatening to kill that group of people. And he was incredibly belligerent and violent. And that man happened to be black. So based solely on the color of the skin, here's what Jamal Bowman writes. Dear white people, I don't know why I feel the need to keep talking to you. And he was lamenting what he described as a lack of accountability and, systemic racism. Like everything in this country is done through the lens of racism. That's his viewpoint. He says this: some of you are too far gone but maybe enough of you aren't and will join us in fighting to end white supremacy. This is all based, again, the fact that a white man who was protecting people of any ethnicity on the subway, didn't matter who they were, by taking down this guy, and the guy unfortunately died as a result of it. But he was threatening to kill all these people. Daniel Penny's a hero in this. Self-defense. So Bowman's post, it was, laced with all this divisive rhetoric out there. He criticized white Americans specifically for failing to combat racial injustice, citing a lot of these high-profile, police violence cases is what he put out there. He mentioned Rodney King back in Los Angeles back in the early 90s. Remember him? He was injured by cops, and that was wrong. The cops should not have beat him. I supported their conviction. They were wrong in doing that. They weren't convicted. They were let loose, and that's sparked the LA riots and all that stuff. Eric Garner, he mentioned him. Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor. He mentioned George Floyd, and then he mentioned Jordan Neely. That was the gentleman who was killed. But I call him gentleman, but he was trying to kill people. Jordan Neely was. So he was killed by the recently acquitted Daniel Penny. So then Jamal Bowman asks white people how many times they've seen a white man killed in cold blood on camera on their news feeds. And then he says, the answer is never. You never have. And whenever you feel discomfort from your whiteness, black people are harmed or killed. And there's never accountability or justice. He hates white people, and he hates whiteness is the way he described it. And it's incredibly divisive, and he's wrong in his assessment. Even his claims. He ignores these statistics showing that, more white Americans, by the way, than black Americans have died in these police shootings since 2015. Even the Washington Post, they've got their police shooting database. The Washington Post, they've recorded 4,618 white people have been killed by cops since 2015. That's a 9-year period. 4,618 white people have died by police shooting them. How many black people? 2,469 in that exact same time frame. So almost twice as many white people. He says it never happens. And those people, white and black who've been killed by police, what were they doing at the time? What were both those white and black people, or whatever nationality you happen to be, when you were shot by a cop, what was that person doing? This is what Jamal Bowman completely ignores. Ask yourself that, Jamal Bowman, and be honest about it. If you answered that question honestly, you'd probably tone down your rhetoric. It's a sad state of affairs when you see a guy like that targeting people based on the color of their skin. So you have other members of Congress, soon to be Representative-elect Mike Lawler. He's a Republican out of New York, same state. He fired back with a meme mocking Bowman's defeat, prompting the outgoing congressman to double down, claiming his posts hit a nerve. Yeah, well, they did hit a nerve because you're wrong in your assessment. And it's a sad thing, and I think Bowman believes this. I don't think he's being dishonest in the sense that he doesn't really believe what he's saying. I think he does, Jamal Bowman does, but I think he's so incredibly deceived by what's known as critical race theory, this belief that this oppressor and oppressed type of construct that they have built up in these universities when this whole theory was developed based on Marxist principles. So anyway, Bowman's gone. He's out of Congress in January, alongside a fellow squad member, Cori Bush, making a shift away from these squad dominance in Congress. And that's one of the reasons why he's acting like a racist by his own words on X. All right, Nancy Mace. Why didn't he talk about what happened to Nancy Mace? Capitol Police have arrested a suspect after this alleged assault on Congresswoman Nancy Mace there. She's a vocal advocate, of course, safeguarding women's rights and women's safety. So she was physically accosted yesterday evening on Capitol grounds, and the suspect is identified as James McIntyre. He's a 33-year-old out of Illinois, swiftly apprehended by Capitol Police officers in the Rayburn House office building. Got in there somehow and attacked her. So Nancy Mace, she's known for her resolute stance on protecting women's spaces. And she confirmed the incident on X. She was on X as well. She said, I was physically accosted tonight on Capitol grounds over my fight to protect women. Capitol Police have arrested him. Women deserve to be safe. Your threats will not stop my fight for women. She's a woman. She's not safe, but she's going to continue to fight. She recently, spearheaded these efforts to ensure that bathrooms on Capitol Hill correspond to biological sex. And that seems to be the premise of this attack on her because she believes in, sex being a biological indicator of what your sex is. You can tell biologically if a person is a man or a woman. Seems obvious enough, but a lot of people no longer believe that statement. And that move that she's making there garnered, again, a lot of fervent opinions, support, but also backlash. And her resolution, if you're not familiar with it, it's HR. It's a bill 1579, HR 1579, and it's just aiming to establish clearer boundaries for members of Congress, officers, and staff. And it's her belief in the need to protect women's privacy and safety. We don't need men's genitalia hanging out in a locker room or a bathroom where women are supposed to have privacy. There's a reason for that. A lot of intense opposition against her for that. Sarah McBride is the name. I forget the biological first name of McBride. Democrat out of Delaware. Is biological male. She's a he biologically. He identifies as female, using women's restrooms. So Mace doesn't like that, and based on the election of McBride, she wants to put in, Nancy Mace does this bill, and hopefully it gets passed. And she says women deserve better. The violence only strengthens my resolve. So good for Nancy Mace for standing strong in this. Capitol Police are investigating the incident, increasing hostility surrounding this cultural battleground on this issue. And a lot of times you'll notice that a lot of the violence comes from the left on these issues. And they try to rationalize it by, hey, certain violence is wrong. Just like when, what was her name? Taylor Lorenz came out and she seemed to celebrate the fact that the CEO of United Healthcare Insurance was killed, murdered. And she was not sad about it. She even said, people wonder why we want these executives dead. So that's the attitude, that's the mindset. Speaking of a far-left individual, Al Sharpton got a $1 million payday. A lot of questions now about, nonprofit ethics. The guy is rich off his nonprofit. Al Sharpton, I don't call him Reverend. I know he wants to be called that, but I don't really revere the guy. Al Sharpton. He is obviously a familiar face on MSNBC. Head of the National Action Network, drawn a lot of scrutiny now based on his network and making a whole lot of money. Revelations that he pocketed nearly $1 million in bonuses from his nonprofit over a 7-year period. And the tax records show that Sharpton gave himself bonuses starting in 2014, payouts peaking in 2016 when he awarded himself $437,000. More than that, actually, just a tad, a hair above that, almost $438,000 in 2016. His base salary is $250,000 a year for that year, at least. I don't know what it is right now. But his financial practices within his nonprofit organization have been a pattern. In 2018, he collected $159,000 in bonuses alongside $563,000 in other reportable compensation. And by 2021, he granted himself an additional $278,000, which is nearly 80% of his $348,000 a year salary. So there's a lot of questions now being renewed, about nonprofit governance. Critics pointing to the apparent pay-to-play politics. Remember Vice President Kamala Harris, a presidential campaign, donated $500,000 to Al Sharpton's nonprofit so he can interview her on MSNBC. There seems to be collusion between this news organization, his nonprofit, and Al Sharpton. A little bit of a payday. And Kamala Harris Did MSNBC get a little kickback on her? I don't know. I can't say, but he did. And that wasn't disclosed by Al Sharpton or MSNBC. And the donations are the whole slew of ethical questions and concerns about transparency in these obvious conflicts of interest. All right, just the latest update on Al Sharpton. Thank you so much for your time today. We hope you enjoyed it. If you could, please share the podcast with whoever you deem fit. You could be friends, it could be enemies, anybody you would like. It helps us out quite a bit. Remember, we're on YouTube, X, Facebook, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and LinkedIn as well. Back here tomorrow, got a great program planned for you then, 9 a.m. Eastern, right here, Tom Jordan Live. God bless you. Have a great day.